Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the election wrap brought to you by InDaily. Although, on a matter of semantics, I'm not entirely sure that it is an election wrap. It could well just be a prolonged update. That's probably a question best answered by the panel here today. I'm joined by Melissa Mack, InDaily AM editor, Dr. Clem McIntyre, Adelaide University Head of School of History and Politics, and John Spoehr, also from the Adelaide University. I welcome you all. Perhaps that's a question we'll ask her in just a moment, but to Melissa first, you were involved in the coverage for InDaily on Saturday night. Now, election can drag on. It can be uninteresting at times. Gentlemen, I apologise for my offending sensibilities, but there are moments when the average Joe says it's time to switch off. You couldn't do that, and it was one that did go on for a long time. But was it exciting? Was it exciting, the coverage to do for InDaily?
Oh, well, it was, of course. Started out very exciting. Twitter just going off.
Yes.
Tweeting from early on. And, counting started. Wasn't really tipping either way from the start and then till the end as well. I think by about 9, most people were tipping that it would be a hung parliament. So that's where it ended up.
Yeah, that's where we find ourselves even today, some 6 days later. I must admit, when the planning came up to do an election wrap 7 days after the election, few thought it might be a little far removed from the event. Little did we know we'd still be right in the middle of it. Is it, Clem, the most remarkable election, if not outcome, situation that we've had in Australian political history?
Well, in many regards it is, in sense of the balance between it. I think there have been momentous elections, the election of Whitlam in 72 and probably the return of Howard in 96 and so on are really significant elections in terms of shifting the balance of Australian politics. But in terms of, basically a score draw or, just not knowing how it's going to play out, yes, we've never had to wait this long to find out who's going to be the next Prime Minister, and there's every chance we'll be waiting another week.
We could well be back here again, gentlemen, and ladies, of course, too. Well, before we get to the nuts and bolts and perhaps what the situation is, John, can you sort of read a little bit into what the result, and once again, I use that term rather loosely, what it meant, what it reflected in the sentiment of Australian people?
Well, I think some interesting things were playing out. On the one hand, I think we had a lot of disillusionment about the CPRS, the carbon tax, a carbon tax not being introduced in Australia, and that was reflected, I think, in the large increase in the Green votes, in the Green vote, and also the power of the mining lobby in their campaign against the mining tax. That played out in Queensland and WA. They're mining-rich states. The mining lobby is very strong in those states. And you could see a significant loss of Labor seats in those states because I think the campaign against the tax was that much stronger in those states.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to make a reminder to people too that if you are watching at the moment and you do want to get in contact with the panel, ask them a question, anything along that line, you can get in contact with us via the Twitter at Australia Live TV, our Facebook page with the same name, or indeed you can send us an email by clicking on the banner directly below where you're watching us at the moment. I guess then the pertinent question, Clem, what's the state of play at the moment? Where are we right now?
Well, I think where we are is we've got a government that probably has been rejected by the voters and in many respects has probably lost a legitimate claim over a mandate, but we've not got an opposition that's been voted in. And that's why we've got the decision really resting in the hand of potentially 6 crossbenchers who will make the determination. So I agree with John's point. There was a sense of disillusionment, I think, with many of the policies of the major parties, and we were prepared to say to the Labor government, not happy, but we weren't prepared to endorse an alternative.
So how has this worked before when we've had hung parliaments or minority governments in the States?
In the States, it's worked reasonably successfully. The major parties will sit down with the independents, with the crossbenchers, and negotiate, try and get a majority on the floor of the House. And generally speaking, there have been exceptions, but generally speaking, when those negotiations have been conducted, the government has lasted for the full term of the Parliament. So at one level, it's a bizarre outcome for us federally, with the first time since 1940. But there's no reason why it's a bad outcome. I think that there's opportunities here for some reform of Parliament, and there's no reason why the Parliament won't go its full term and a government lasts. Now, that may not be the case, but it doesn't have to be the case that there's instability.
It's interesting to see that this comes on the back of the British election, which of course we saw the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives form a coalition government there. So there's a bit of an international trend, a convergence, I think, going on, which is interesting.
I think that if I can, the difference there, though, I not disagreeing with your analysis, John, but what we're seeing there was a party, the Liberal Democrats as a party negotiating. This time we've potentially got 6 independents or 1 minor party Greens and try to herd them together and get some coherence in their negotiations with either of the major parties. That's why it will take longer than it did in the UK.
Absolutely.
I think most of the states are represented except South Australia. What could that mean for us in the negotiation.
In the sense of the independents in the lower house. I think that what it means is that we're not going to have a significant player on in the rooms doing the deals. What the independents will be looking for is a mixture of particular arrangements for their local area, but a national picture as well in terms of parliamentary reform. So in the sense that we get some shift in policies, we get some parliamentary reform, there's no reason why South Australia won't benefit, but we're unlikely to get the particular focus and attention that a seat like Kennedy might or New England might in relation, say, to early rollout of broadband or something like that. So in a sense, South Australia is marginally disadvantaged, but I don't think it's significant in the, over the course of the full parliament.
Yep.
Clem, you just mentioned 1940 before, the last time we saw this at a federal level, and it doesn't really give much cause for hope for stability, does it? If you look at that example where, of course, two independents sided with Menzies, then turned to John Curtin partway through the term.
Yep.
Can we expect something? Is that outside of the realm of possibility in our current predicament?
It's possible but unlikely. Okay. That's assuming again that the independents act as a coordinated bloc. If say 4 or 5 of them align with one side of the political divide at the moment and install either Tony Abbott or Julie Gillard, and then collectively change their mind in 18 months' time, then yes, it's possible for the government to change hands without an election. But I think just if we reflect upon the public mood when Labor deposed Kevin Rudd, there was a sense that Labor changed the Prime Minister without referring it to the people. Yep. I think if we change the whole government without there being an election, I suspect the sentiment in the electorate would be really quite challenging, and I'm not sure that tactically, politically, that would be a good thing for an opposition to do. They may well want to, if it does fall apart, they may well want to spill of all of the seats and a fresh election so that they've got a more legitimate mandate.
John, it's a muddled picture, not just in terms of governance and exactly how it's going to be formed and all that, but also too when you consider the mix of not just personalities but political ideologies and different motivations. How do you expect it all to fit together ultimately? If we take probably what is, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but probably the view that it'll perhaps be a Labor government that does get returned with the support of the independents. What will that mean? Because there's so many different factors that determine exactly what policies are of importance to these different people.
Of course. We've been focusing mainly on the lower house. There's a story going on in the upper house as well, isn't there? And it's a very important story with the significant gains that the Greens made, and they're going to play a major role, of course, holding the balance of power in the upper house. And you've heard overtures from Bob Brown, who'd actually like to be part of this coalition government. If he could. I doubt that that's going to eventuate. Labor will do everything they can to keep the Greens out, I think. But nevertheless, what it suggests to me is that they're going to be wielding a lot of influence over the passage of legislations over the course of the next few years. So Labor's going to not only have to negotiate with the independents, they're going to have to negotiate with the Greens, and that's going to produce some interesting tensions. We've got some of the independents who will find it very difficult to support any form of CPRS, that is a tax on carbon. So that is going to be a tension between the Greens and the independents, and how that plays out will be fascinating.
Absolutely. Comment that's been made to me, not just in passing, just about by everybody after this, is that you mentioned something that people thought was a bit of an affront to democracy. That was the removal of the previous Prime Minister just by his own party and the faceless men. It was a big election factor. But a lot of people have been saying, hey, there are 3 independents at play here that were elected by less than 1% of the vote, yet they're the ones wielding all the power now. More broadly speaking, how does this happen in a system that proclaims to be democratic?
Well, the key point to make here, I think, is you're right. There may be 3 or 4 independents who ultimately make the call on who becomes the next Prime Minister, but they only make that in association with about 70 other elected members. So on their own, they have no power.
Yep.
If the two parties, if Labor and the Coalition combine in a vote, then the independents are seen for what they are, 4 or 5 votes out of 150. They only have influence, and they have the same vote as every other member of the House of Representatives. They only have influence if the rest of the Parliament is split 50-50. And that's the sort of quirk of democracy in a sense that we've seen. The country, I think it's fair to say, is fairly split between Labor and Coalition. That's why, as John was suggesting, we've seen a rise in the votes for the Greens. We've seen a rise in the votes for informal. We've seen independents elected in greater numbers than before. So that's the quirk of the numbers, that those people, in a sense, it's not just the tail wagging the dog. The dog's got to want to be wagged at the same time.
Now the independents are making demands at the moment. They've got 7 key points. Julia Gillard seems fairly welcome to negotiate with them, whereas Tony Abbott's taking a more hardline stance. Do you think there's any better approach that's going to appeal to the electorate and also to the independents?
Look, I think from my perspective, those negotiations just have to be played out, and they're appropriately played out behind closed doors. I think it's sensible for the independents to have got themselves a bit of a shopping list. That won't be exhaustive. There'll be other things that they want to talk about, but that's in a sense laying out the foundation. And they need to talk to the two party leaders and see where they stand in relation to that. And it's frustrating in a sense as a voter to say, well, hang on, the election was last Saturday and we still don't know how it's going to end up. We just have to be patient, I think, and allow what is really a fairly robust democratic process with lots of integrity in it to play out. And we should be celebrating, in a sense, the fact that our political system is mature enough to deal with this and we're not in a crisis position because of the apparent deadlock.
I think Tony Abbott's in a very difficult position in relation to the transparency of his budget estimates and the costings in relation to his budget estimates. And that campaign seems to be having some resonance, I think, politically for Labor and the independents who are demanding that the numbers that they developed in the lead up to the budget be exposed to Treasury scrutiny. I think it's going to be difficult for Tony Abbott to withstand that for too long without him losing credibility.
Well, on that, John, not sure if you heard News Limited reporting just prior to us coming on air that, in fact, Abbott, there was somewhat of a backflip there, and now he was going to show the costings to the independents, but Julia wasn't allowed to look.
Okay, that's interesting. I don't think that's going to wash.
Okay. A little bit too convenient.
Yeah, absolutely,
yeah. All the same. Okay, so we've got costings as certainly a factor at this point in time. Anything else we should look to indicator-wise to be able to get some idea? I mean, what will have to buckle either way?
Well, we know that the concerns of the independents are things like broadband.
Yep.
We know that they share a common view in relation to, say, telecommunications infrastructure more generally, over provision of health and education services at the local level. Then after that, they split in a sense. Some of them are in favour of a super profits tax on mineral resources. Some of them are not. Some of them have dyed in the wool in their opposition on that.
Yep.
Some are in favour of CPRS, as John is suggesting. Others are not. So that's why we're not seeing really, in a sense, the formation of a mini party. They've got different agendas. And it's a question really of us waiting till we know exactly how many seats each of the major party blocks have got. That will tell us how many they need in order to form a majority on the floor of the House. And after that, it's a question of sitting down, having looked at the collective picture of the independents, then going and doing deals with the likes of Wilkie from Tasmania, Bant from the Greens in Melbourne, the three from Queensland and New South Wales, and possibly the West Australian as well. Till we know the exact numbers, we're not going to know what the balance of concessions and agreements will be.
Just looking to the Senate as well, up until next July when the new Senate will take on and the Greens will have power, whoever forms government's going to have to deal with Stephen Fielding, who's made a couple of claims this morning. What do you guys think about that?
Stephen Fielding is in a very influential position for the next 10 months. The coalition plus Fielding alone can block legislation. And in a sense, he was trying to make that point today that don't forget me, I'm in the upper house. Having said that, I think his moral high ground claims are pretty thin. Here is somebody who was a candidate for election himself, who got voted out of office unambiguously by the people of Victoria, who's now challenging the mandate of the Labor government. So, I think he might be in a position where he can be a blocker, but I don't think ultimately it's going to be a very productive and constructive role to be playing.
Why do you think he is doing that?
I suspect, this is absolute guesswork, I suspect that his sympathies are with the coalition forming a government, and to the extent that he can influence the deliberations of the independents. We know that one of the concerns of the independents is the capacity for a government they might install to get legislation through. They will need the Senate to get legislation through. If he's making it clear that he's not in favour of a Labor government in the lower house, that might be a factor. It might actually work against him, though. It might be a bit of a, what's the word I want, a provocation that the independents don't want to take up. The Senate changes, of course, in July, on the 1st of July, and the Greens hold the balance of power then. So Fielding's got a role for a few months. I'm not sure it'll be as much of a blocker as he's perhaps proposing initially.